Welcome back to America's Forum. I'm J.D. Hayworth.
And I'm John Bachman. J.D., this story involving the former Navy analyst Jonathan Pollard, who apparently spied for the Israelis and is potentially going to be released now. It's really igniting a firestorm of controversy right here, and we're going to get to it. But first, let's give everybody a quick recap of what this story is all about. Officials say the Obama administration is discussing with the Israeli government a possibility of releasing spy Jonathan Pollard early from his life sentence. The move, if allowed, would come in return for concessions from the Israeli government. The release of Pollard, a former Navy intelligence analyst who passed secret documents to Israel while working for the U.S., would mark a reversal of decades of U.S. policy. This, as Secretary of State John Kerry is in Jerusalem for urgent peace talks. So would the release of Pollard be a key step forward for Middle East peace negotiations or a huge step back for U.S. policy? Joining us right now to discuss this is retired Air Force four-star General Michael Hayden, also the former director of the NSA and the CIA, and one of the guys who can explain this type of stuff better than anybody.
And General Hayden, we're going to call on your expertise here, because when I think about Jonathan Pollard, Israel may be an ally, but for Jonathan Pollard to engage in active espionage against his own nation, and then to see him possibly pardoned for perhaps the promise of renewing the whole peace process with the Palestinians. Oh, and we should also point out, in exchange for 400 Palestinian prisoners. Wow, this just to me is inexplicable. Can you explain the rationale for something like this?
No, well, actually, J.D., no, I can't. And I had the same reaction that you did on so many levels. This just doesn't feel right. Let me give you one level, though, that, maybe slightly more positive, and that's a humanitarian level. The man has spent a quarter century in jail. He had a plea bargain between himself and the prosecutors. The judge threw out. He got a particularly harsh sentence. So if you've got a humanitarian question here, look at it in due time, in the calmness and the light of day, as a humanitarian question. But this is just weird. It looks like it smacks of desperation on the part of the United States and our Secretary of State to do anything in order to keep this peace process alive. And that's a fairly unsettling fact. One of the dangers when you get into negotiations with the Russians over Crimea and the Ukraine, the Iranians over nuclear weapons, between the Israelis and the Palestinians, you fear that your negotiators get so caught up in the negotiations that they'll do anything to keep the talks alive. And that's what this seems to be. And let me give you one other big point, too. I think it's really important and not yet noticed much. Most of the people from my old career field, those 100,000 plus intelligence professionals, will think of this not as being a lot about Pollard, but as perhaps a signal as to what someone someday might do with Snowden.
Yeah,
and I think that would be a really disastrous signal to send out there.
That's the question you got to ask, especially when you have Jimmy Carter saying that he might consider pardoning Snowden if he were still in the Oval Office here. But what kind of message does this send to other intelligence analysts, the Bradley Mannings of the world, the Edward Snowdens of the world, if there is, some sort of deal made here?
Yeah, George Tenet, when President Clinton considered this, and actually considered it at a point where he had much more of an agreement in hand than Secretary Kerry has, George Tenet threatened to resign if President Clinton went ahead with this. And I suspect the current intelligence community leadership would react very much the same way. Betrayal is betrayal, and it has consequences.
And so it doesn't matter if it's one of our allies or one of our enemies. Is that what you're saying here? I mean, should there be...
That's exactly right. Betrayal is betrayal. This was information that our friends, even our friends, did not have legitimate access to, and Pollard provided it to them. That's not his decision.
General Hayden...
And let's put the same thing on Snowden. That's not his decision either.
Now, you proffered one rationale as you and I were incredulous over this earlier, and you said, well, there may be a humanitarian angle in terms of the fact that Pollard has spent a quarter century behind bars. But the flip side of that, releasing 400 Palestinian prisoners, many of whom presumably were up to active taking up of arms against Israel, there's nothing humanitarian about that. And it leads me to yet another bit of calculus here. How much of this is political? We know this is popular with some Israelis at least. Does this help President Obama's standing with Israel, which has been somewhat tenuous, to put it mildly, in the past?
Oh, no. Look, I do think many supporters of Israel would be very happy if Mr. Pollard were released, and so to that degree, certainly, the president would buy support among those who are strong supporters of the Jewish state. No question about it.
Well, we'll hear that line of argument coming from Alan Dershowitz a little bit later in the program. You know, General Hayden, you were talking about here, it doesn't matter if it's one of our allies or one of our enemies here in this case when it comes to releasing this type of information. You know, when you look at this with everything going on around the NSA and the CIA and the public opinion on these issues here in this country, are we setting up sort of a perfect storm here for a real erosion in the protocol and the procedures that's gone along with this type of information being closely guarded within these intelligence agencies? Because I keep coming back not just to Edward Snowden, but Bradley Manning, who was very young and very impressionable, and that is the idea you get when you think of some of these intelligence analysts now taking a look at all this very crucial information.
No, we certainly are recruiting from a cohort of young folks whose definition of legitimate secret is very different than yours or mine or people of our generations. And then that's just a reality. And that's then a condition that the intelligence community has to deal with. And there's another dynamic, too. Our political culture is demanding more transparency from everything. And so I think as a conscious, and I should add, well-managed decision, the intelligence community is going to have to be a bit more public about some of the things that it's doing. Otherwise, they won't have the national consensus they need to do those things in the first place.
Well, these are certainly tumultuous times for the intelligence community, and why we have you here, General Hayden, is to get your take on these things and explain it to us. So thank you very much for being here. Always a pleasure to speak with you, sir.
Thank you very much.
General Hayden with his take. What is your take? We would like to hear from you. Are you for full transparency? Is there a legitimate way to gather intelligence that needs to be obscured somewhat? Why don't you tweet us at NewsmaxTV, #AmericasForum, or you can email us, connect@newsmaxtv.com, and then there's facebook.com/Newsmax.
Tonight we are a country